Part 2. Elara's Window. The Cartography of Aspiration. Chapter 1. The Sanctuary of Light and Sound. The cottage, a tenacious little structure clinging to a rocky outcrop, was more than just shelter. It was a philosophical observatory for the soul, perched high above the valley floor. It granted its sole inhabitant, Elara, a vantage point where the mundane pressures of the lowland world were filtered out by sheer altitude and persistent mist. Her existence was meticulously measured, not by the arbitrary tick of a clock, for she had discarded such tyranny long ago, but by the profound natural metrics of the mountain environment. Every morning, the ritual began with the sun. Having battled and conquered the eastern slopes, the first definitive heavy gold of the light did not merely enter the room. It spilled across the floor with the deliberate viscous quality of liquid amber. This light was a protagonist in her daily narrative, its slow, majestic advance terminating at the cool, smooth sill where she would sit and gaze. The stone was her boundary and her anchor, worn smooth by countless hours of quiet communion, the interface between the contained self and the vast, demanding external world. The rectangle of the window framed her entire known cosmos. The world lay just beyond that threshold, a vibrant tapestry of alpine life, yet much of it was constantly being re-rendered by atmospheric phenomena. A soft pearlescent gauze, the misty haze would rise from the glacial runoff, clinging tenaciously to the valley floor until the sun's sustained heat could burn it into translucence. This mist was the boundary of her present understanding. The omniscient narrator understood that this haze was not an obstruction but a necessary period of ambiguity. The world, immense and tangible, lay unseen beyond the misty haze until the right moment of clarity arrived. Elara, though she did not possess the narrator's complete vision, trusted this process of delayed revelation. She knew that to rush the sight was to miss the wisdom embedded in the waiting, that the most important truths often reside in the unseen, compelling the observer to rely on intuition rather than sight. The haze was a training ground for inner vision. 100 feet below, carving the very bedrock of the valley, the river ran. The sound it produced was a constant, deep-seated resonance, a constant hum of sound she'd always known. It was the fundamental baseline of her existence, the oldest and most trustworthy rhythm in her life, a sound that penetrated her subconscious even when she slept. This river was the most profound, non-human mentor she had ever encountered. It had taught her everything of flow, the strategic yielding required when faced with immutable rock, the unstoppable power of persistence that achieves erosion over eons, the sudden peace that follows the turmoil of a waterfall's drop. This perpetual fluid manifesto was a steady language meant for her alone. To the few other isolated homesteaders it was mere noise. To Elara it was syntax, grammar, and philosophy. She could, with closed eyes, decode the river's message. The subtle shift in timbre, speaking of heavy rain miles away. The increased velocity whispering of fresh snowmelt high above the tree line. It was a continuous lesson in action and consequence, demanding relentless movement and utterly forbidding stasis. The river told her that existence was defined by perpetual becoming, not being. Chapter 2. The Instrumental Score of Inner Life. As the environmental sounds established the setting, the internal landscape began to be scored by music, a soundtrack that mirrored her ascent, from the earthen base to the airy heights of aspiration. The acoustic guitar starts its soft, slow theme. The rhythm was deliberate, almost liturgical, each chord allowed to breathe and decay fully in the thin, cool air before the next arrived. This was the music of profound contemplation, not reckless impulse. A quiet hope built into every chord provided the melodic tension. It was a hope tempered by the arduous reality of the mountain landscape, a hope that understood the high cost of ascent, the muscle burned, and the patience required. This subtle musical affirmation was an echo of the geological world, reflecting back the promise of a dream rooted not in the ephemeral world of fantasy, but in the solid possibility of personal achievement against a colossal backdrop. Elara's soul felt an intrinsic, almost familial kinship with the monumental entity surrounding her, defining a life she felt the mountains had adored. This was the silent, unconditional adoration of witnessing. The mountains offered her the dignity of their unchanging, eternal attention. They were the silent, stone-clad witnesses to her deep-seated ambition. This feeling intensified when the flute would rise and weave a hopeful sigh. The flute's voice was pure spirit, airy, effortless, a melodic aspiration that seemed to disregard the physical laws of gravity that bound the earth-rooted river and the grounded guitar. It articulated a gentle yearning that she could not name, a desire that transcended objects or people, manifesting as a pure abstract call for expansion and spiritual altitude. This unnamed feeling was a feeling born beneath a waiting sky. The sky, high and vast, felt less like an atmosphere and more like a conscious entity holding its breath over the valley, patiently awaiting her pivotal choice. The flute song was simultaneously soothing and fiercely catalytic, a whisper calling her to rise. Like flame, the image of the flame was a powerful metaphor for her destiny. Rising vertically, consuming its own past form as fuel, and reaching relentlessly toward the light, regardless of the turbulent winds of external opposition. The flute's call was not a command, but a gentle, resonant suggestion of her own inherent vertical trajectory, reminding her that her ultimate purpose was not horizontal movement through the valley of comfort, but challenging ascent toward the dangerous, brilliant heights of selfhood. Chapter 3. The Meticulous Cartography of the Soul. Elara's most sacred, most intense work was performed at the windowsill, using the morning light as her primary illuminator. She was far more than a dreamer. She was a meticulous scholar of her environment, seeking to internalize the external world through the exacting discipline of creation. With focused intensity, she drew the map of all the peaks nearby. This was no mere topographical survey. It was a complex charting of her potential life paths, a personal mythology drawn in ink. Every shaded slope, each bend the water took, was meticulously recorded. She understood that the mountain's shaded slopes represented inevitable risks, moral ambiguities, and hidden challenges, while the river's bends symbolized necessary changes in her life's direction, the required flexibility of purpose. To trace them was to mentally preempt the journey, preparing the will for the trials ahead. Her focus was absolute, beneath the gaze of morning, clear and high, the light acting as an impartial, brilliant judge of her commitment. The utter clarity in the atmosphere was reflected brightly in her open look, an expression utterly devoid of doubt, distraction, or the clutter of minor worries. Her hands, calloused from years of living, rough but delicate in their fine detail work, would reverently trace the lines of silent stone. These lines were the geological history of endurance, the mountain's vast autobiography, written in millennia of stress, fracture, and uplift. She was reading the primary source text of perseverance. She focused intently on the extreme limits of the known world, the highest point where only eagles flew. That summit was the literal and metaphorical apex of her ambition, a rarefied space reserved for those with the courage, the sharp vision, and the required solitude of the apex predator. She knew that to reach it meant shedding all non-essential weight, the baggage of convention, the comfort of companionship, the ease of the well-trod path. It was the point of ultimate solitary clarity. A profound, almost spiritual truth had been revealed to her through her silent apprenticeship. She knew a larger destiny was sown, not in the exotic or the distant, but in every simple vista she withdrew. The profound lay hidden in the mundane. The simple, gentle curve of the river held the promise of the massive, world-changing ocean. The single jagged peak was the precise blueprint for the entire monumental range of her potential accomplishments. The active withdrawal was the necessary, deep focus required to extract these simple, powerful truths from the clamorous chaos of the visible world. She had catalogued every challenge, internalized every lesson, and the map was now complete, a mirror of the landscape of her own soul. Chapter 4. The Threshold of Action and Liberty. The hours passed. The sun crested the mid-morning sky, its ascending angle shifting the shadows and bringing the final, inevitable message. The time for contemplation was ending. The light had traveled its full trajectory across the floor, was now beginning its slow westward withdrawal. Elara slowly turns away, the light still on her cheek, a warm, brilliant brand of the solar energy she had absorbed. The lingering heat marked her, signaling a necessary shift from the passive state of receiving energy to the active state of generating her own outward momentum. A profound and exhilarating realization settled upon her soul. The time for watching soon will cease to be. This was not a moment of loss or regret, but of immense, almost terrifying anticipation. The cycle of passive learning, the silent tutelage of the mountain was complete. The river had delivered its final lecture on fluid dynamics. The acoustic guitar had played its last chord of foundational hope. The next movement in her life's grand symphony demanded instruments of action, sturdy boots, taut rope, and an unflinching will, not mere observation. The window, which had served faithfully as her proscenium arch, now stood before her as a simple, unadorned open window that waits for her to speak. It was the final uncrossed threshold, a frame ready to witness her transformation. It was a moment requiring a verbal conscious declaration of intent, a breaking of the long contemplative silence. The world outside, once merely a painted scene for study, was now a challenge, a calling, and a solemn promise. All the maps, all the whispered rhythms of the water, and all the soaring melodies of the flute had led her to this singular, defining instant. She stood poised, her muscles tense with readiness, prepared to choose the road that leads to liberty. The omniscient narrator knew that this liberty was not the superficial freedom from external constraint, but the profound, hard-won freedom to become the self. The mountains had been grooming her to be the self demanded by her highest aspirations. The next step, the conscious movement, would transform the gentle overture into the main, unstoppable, and enduring movement of her life's ascent.